Utah Territory, September 1871. The first thing Xander Truett saw was the glint of metal between the rocks. The sun was dipping behind the red cliffs of the canyon, throwing long shadows over the dust and scrub. He slowed his horse, narrowing his eyes. That flash had not been a trick of the light. He dismounted quietly, boots crunching over dry brush, and stepped toward the narrow crevice between two boulders. Then he heard it. A sharp inhale, a shift of fabric. "Who's there?" he called, hand resting on the butt of his revolver. No answer. He stepped closer, cautious. "I am not here to hurt you, but I saw something. Someone." A pause. Then a voice worn, cracked, tired. "Please, do not come closer." Xander froze. "I will not. But you should know this canyon is not safe after dark. Mountain lions, snakes. Worse if you are alone." A stir behind the rocks. Then a woman stepped out slowly, her hands raised, eyes wide and wary. She looked half-starved. Mud streaked her dress, and her boots were falling apart at the seams. Her hair, once probably golden, was tangled and dull. But her eyes, green and sharp, met his without fear. "My name is Xander Truett," he said. "I am no threat to you." She hesitated, then said, Beatrice Lorne." He nodded once. "Are you hurt?" "No," he studied her. "Then why are you hiding?" Beatrice glanced behind her, toward the dark slit of the canyon wall. She did not answer. Xander stepped back, giving her space. "I have a small fire an hour's ride west. Pack horse with extra food. You can rest there tonight." She shook her head. "I cannot go with you. I am not asking for anything, just offering help." Her mouth pressed into a hard line. Then she said, "I have a child." Xander blinked. "There is a child back there?" Her chin lifted, like she was daring him to judge her. "Yes." He nodded, steady. "Then bring them. We should go before night falls." Beatrice turned and called softly, "Mabel, honey, come out." A little girl, maybe 5, stepped from the shadows. She clutched a ragged doll and stared up at Xander with wide brown eyes. Her cheeks were sunken, her dress torn, but she moved with quiet care, like she had learned not to make noise. Xander's heart squeezed at the sight of her. "Hello, Mabel," he said gently. "I have food. You hungry?" The girl nodded once, still silent. Beatrice scooped her up, though her arms trembled under the weight. "We will come, but only for the night." Xander nodded. "That is fine." They rode in silence, Beatrice and Mabel sharing his saddle while he led the pack horse. The sun vanished behind the canyon rim, and the desert cooled fast. When they reached his camp, Xander handed over a blanket, then knelt by the fire and opened a tin of beans. Beatrice fed Mabel first, her hands shaking. She kept stealing glances at Xander, like she did not trust the quiet way he moved or the way he gave them space. "You running from someone?" he asked softly. Beatrice glanced at Mabel, then back at him. "Not someone. Something." Xander waited. "My husband was a Union soldier," she said. "He died at Shiloh. I was pregnant with Mabel when the letter came." His throat tightened. "I am sorry." She nodded. "After the war, I had nothing. I took a job at the quartermaster's office in Fort Bridger. I kept to myself. But 2 months ago, I found something. A paper my husband had hidden before he died. Something that was not meant to be found." Xander's brow furrowed. "What kind of paper?" Her voice dropped to a whisper. "It was a map. He was part of a unit that moved Confederate gold. Most of it was lost after the war, but that paper showed where it went. He must have copied it." Xander blinked, stunned. "You were saying you know where that gold is?" Beatrice nodded. "I never meant to take it, but someone found out. A man I thought was a friend. He tried to take Mabel. Said if I did not give him the map, he would." Her voice broke. Xander's hands curled into fists. "I ran," she said. "I burned the map, but I remember it." He leaned forward slowly. "Does anyone else know?" I do not think so. I have been hiding ever since. He looked at the fire, then back at her. You did the right thing. Protecting your daughter. Beatrice watched him for a long moment. Then she whispered, you believe me. I do. She exhaled, the tension in her shoulders loosening just a little. Later, after Mabel fell asleep curled in the blanket, Xander brought her another tin of food and sat across from her. The firelight flickered between them. I do not know what to do, she said quietly. You do not have to know tonight, he answered. But you are not alone anymore. Beatrice looked across the flames at him. I do not know why I trust you. Xander shrugged. Maybe because I am telling the truth. She stared at him for a long time, then nodded once. For the first time in weeks, she slept. They stayed 2 nights, then 3. Xander hunted rabbits and cooked simple meals. He let Mabel help gather kindling, her small fingers wrapped tightly around his whenever they crossed rocky ground. Beatrice watched him closely, unsure what to make of this man who kept offering them safety without asking anything in return. On the 4th night, she finally asked, why are you out here alone? Xander hesitated. Looking for something? What? He glanced over at Mabel, who was curled by the fire. Then he looked back at Beatrice. Peace. She watched him a long time before nodding. Me too. Later, when he tucked another blanket around Mabel, Beatrice touched his arm. He looked up at her. Her eyes were softer now. Thank you, she said. He nodded, but her hand lingered, warm against his sleeve. That night, they sat a little closer by the fire. And for the first time in a long time, she smiled. By the 5th morning, Xander noticed the way Beatrice began folding the blankets with more care, smoothing the creases before laying them over the saddle. She said little over breakfast, just a quiet thank you when he passed her a tin of stewed prunes and a strip of jerky, but her eyes moved beyond their camp now, lingering eastward. Not with fear, with intent. He didn't press her. He knew the difference between someone who was still running and someone who had started to plan. As he saddled the horses, Mabel sat nearby, humming softly to the ragged doll she rarely let out of her arms. Xander kept his voice low. There's a small town about 15 miles east. Dry Creek. Not much more than a mill and a post house, but there's a doctor and a church. Beatrice brushed dirt from her skirt. I've heard of it. I've passed through before. Folks keep to themselves. Might suit you. She tied her hair back with a strip of linen that had once been part of a sleeve. If we go, will you ride with us? I will. They broke camp without ceremony. The canyon narrowed for the first few miles, forcing them to ride single file. The wind shifted mid-morning, carrying the scent of creosote and dry stone. Beatrice rode behind him, Mabel nestled against her chest, arms wrapped around her mother's waist. Xander led the way, keeping his rifle close. When the trail widened and the sun rose higher, he slowed so they could ride side by side. Beatrice adjusted her grip on the reins. You've ridden this country a long time? Since I was 16. She looked sideways at him. What keeps a man doing that? He let the question hang, then said, it's honest and quiet. Quiet can be a kind of loneliness. He glanced at her. So can noise. Beatrice didn't answer, but her shoulders relaxed. They stopped at a creek with a narrow bank shaded by cottonwoods. While Xander watered the horses, Beatrice let Mabel wade barefoot in the shallows. The girl laughed just once and Beatrice looked up sharply, as if uncertain whether she should hush her or let her go on. She's safe here, Xander said from the bank, not moving closer. Beatrice watched Mabel splash at minnows. She hasn't laughed in weeks. You gave her enough to hold on to. Beatrice crouched, trailing her fingers through the water. I think sometimes I forget what I've given her. I only see what I've taken away. Don't? She looked at him. You don't know the half. No, he said. But I've seen what the whole of you's done since I met you. Mabel brought her mother a small stone shaped like an egg and Beatrice tucked it into her skirt pocket without a word. When they rode on, the wind picked up carrying dust from the south. By late afternoon, the land changed. The red of the canyon gave way to dry grass and low sage, and Dry Creek came into view, a crooked ribbon of buildings along a wagon road, a steeple rising like a finger above the rooftops. Smoke curled from a chimney. A dog barked once and was silenced. They stopped at the edge of town. Beatrice turned toward him. You said you'd been here before. Is there someone you trust? Xander nodded toward a low stone building near the end of the road. Widow named Aldine runs the boarding house. Took care of me once when I needed patching up. Keeps to herself. Mine's sharp as a tack. Beatrice looked down at Mabel, who had fallen asleep against her. Then we'll stay there. The boarding house was quiet, the floor swept clean, the walls lined with yellowed paper. Aldine opened the door in a flour-stained apron, her gray hair pinned back in a loose knot. She didn't blink at the sight of Beatrice and Mabel, just took one look at Xander and said, "You owe me 2 days chopping wood if you're bringing guests." He smiled faintly. "I'll start in the morning." Aldine led them upstairs. The room had a narrow bed, a wash basin, and a small window that opened onto the alley. Beatrice put Mabel down gently on the bed, then turned back to Xander. "You'll stay in town?" "I will." She hesitated, then leaned back against the doorframe, arms crossed. "What happens next?" "You tell me." Beatrice studied him. "I'm tired of hiding." "Then don't." She looked down. "If I try to claim a life, they might find us. If you try to disappear, they still might. The difference is whether you have anyone beside you when it happens." Something in her face shifted, not softening, steadying. "I don't have coin," she said. "Just what's in the saddlebag." He reached into his coat and handed her a folded scrap of paper. "There's a woman here who teaches reading to the sons of ranchers. She's looking for someone to help with the younger ones. You can write, can't you?" Beatrice opened the paper slowly. "I can." "Then you have a start." She looked up at him. "Why are you doing this?" "I reckon folks did less for me when I needed it." Her eyes didn't leave his. "You're not just passing through." "No." She nodded once and closed the door gently. Outside, the wind had settled. Xander stood on the porch, hands in his pockets, watching the sun fall behind the roofs of Dry Creek. He didn't move for a long time. The morning after they arrived, Xander rose before dawn, pulled on his coat, and crossed the yard behind the boarding house with an axe over his shoulder. The woodpile leaned crooked near the fence, and he set to work, the rhythm steady and unhurried. The air smelled of dust and old apples. Someone nearby had a tree losing its fruit ahead of the frost. By the time the sun crested the hills, Beatrice stepped out the back door. Her sleeves were rolled, and she held a cracked basin filled with linens. She paused when she saw him, then shifted the basin to her hip. "You don't have to do all of it," she said. Xander glanced up. "I owe Aldine 2 days. I figure I'll earn the rest just to be polite." "Polite's not something I'm used to costing this much sweat." He set another log upright on the stump. "Well, I never had much use for the kind that doesn't." Beatrice watched him split the round cleanly in two. "You always this steady?" He looked over at her. "No." She nodded once, then carried the basin toward the wash line. Xander kept chopping. The sound filled the yard, clean and sharp. Mabel's voice floated out from the kitchen window, high and humming. A tune this time, not a lullaby. Later that day, Beatrice found the schoolhouse at the far end of town where the road narrowed and the fences grew sparse. The teacher, a woman with a bent back and dark ink stains on her fingers, looked her over with a quick, clear gaze before handing her a slate and pointing to the small bench by the stove. Beatrice spent the afternoon sorting chalk, keeping the younger boys from throwing apple cores and guiding a left-handed child through the alphabet with practiced calm. When school let out, she walked back through the main street, her boots catching on the uneven boards of the sidewalk. Xander waited outside the smithy, his coat dusty at the shoulders. He nodded toward her hands. "You take to it all right?" "I didn't have to raise my voice." She adjusted her shawl. "That's all I hoped for." They walked together toward the boarding house. The sun was falling low, painting the clapboard buildings in gold. "You planning to stay on?" he asked. "I think I might," she said. "If the work holds." He nodded. "You'll carve something here." Quietly. She stopped walking. "You think quiet's all I want?" Xander turned to face her. "I think you deserve the kind of life that doesn't have to run." Beatrice tilted her head. "And what about you?" "I've been thinking on that," he said. "More than I used to." She didn't press him. Instead, she looked at the sky. "There's a harvest fair in 2 weeks. Aldine says the whole county turns out. I've seen it once, he said. Livestock, pies, three-legged races. Beatrice gave a brief smile. Mabel's never seen a fair. Then she ought to. They kept walking. In the yard, Mabel sat on the porch steps, her knees drawn up, a wooden spoon in one hand. She stood when she saw them, and Beatrice reached for her, brushing dust from her dress. That night, after supper, Xander sat on the edge of the porch while Beatrice finished mending a torn hem by lantern light. The air carried a crispness that hadn't been there the week before. He watched her thread the needle with slow care. I joined up when I was 17, he said, voice low. Never saw the kind of fighting your husband did. Spent most of my time running dispatch between camps. But I saw enough. Beatrice didn't look up. I used to think if he'd made it back, we'd have been happy. But I don't know if that's true anymore. You don't think he would have changed? I think we both would have, she said. And I don't know if we'd have known what to do with each other after that. Xander nodded slowly. Sometimes surviving makes strangers out of people who used to know each other. She set down the mended dress. What about you? You ever have someone waiting? No, he said. I wasn't someone worth waiting for. Beatrice was quiet for a moment. Then she said, You are now. He looked at her, but she didn't flinch from it. The porch lantern flickered as a breeze pushed through. I think I'd like to see that fair, she said. With you. I think I'd like that too. Inside, Mabel was already asleep, the doll tucked beneath one arm. Beatrice lingered at the door before stepping inside. She paused, her hand resting on the frame. I'm not afraid anymore, she said. Xander rose slowly. Then I'll stay close, so you don't have to be again. She held his gaze for a beat longer, then nodded once and closed the door behind her. Upstairs, the light went out. Xander stood on the porch until the stars were out in full, the sound of crickets rising from the fields. He leaned against the rail, the shape of a life beginning to form in the stillness around him. One not marked by silence, but by something steadier, something earned. The morning light came in soft through the cracks in the shutters, striping the floor of the boarding house room with gold. Beatrice stood by the narrow window, hands resting on the sill, watching as townsfolk crossed the street below, men with feed sacks slung over shoulders, a boy carrying a ladder toward the church. She wasn't used to watching the world from above. Most of her life happened at ground level, eyes down, steps careful. Behind her, Mabel sat on a braided rug with a handful of pine cones she'd gathered the day before. Beatrice turned and crouched beside her, brushing a curl from the girl's brow. You want to wear your blue dress today? Mabel nodded once, then tucked a pine cone into the crook of her doll's arm. Across town, Xander stood in the livery, brushing down a roan mare with one white sock and a mean streak. He worked slow, not because the horse needed it, but because his mind was elsewhere. The stable master leaned on the doorframe, chewing a piece of sweetroot. You're not heading out again, are you? The man asked. No, Xander said. Not for a while. The stable master studied him. Didn't think I'd see the day? Xander didn't answer. The brush slowed, then stopped. He met Beatrice and Mabel near the schoolhouse just after noon, when the bell rang and the children poured out, kicking dust and jostling for space by the fence. Mabel ran ahead and held the gate for him, small fingers wrapped tight around the wood. Beatrice waited behind, her shawl pinned at the shoulder. I saved you something, she said. She handed him a folded square of cloth, still warm. Inside was a biscuit layered with dried apple slices and honey. Xander bit into it without a word. She watched his face, but didn't ask what he thought. They walked toward the edge of town, where the fields sloped gently down toward a stand of cottonwoods. The fair was a week away, and already the air hummed with quiet preparation, men measuring a field for races, women carrying bolts of calico toward the church hall. A wagon passed them, creaking under the weight of bundled quilts. You ever go to these when you were a girl? Xander asked. Once, Beatrice said. We took a train to Missouri the year after my brother turned 12. He won second prize for a carving he made. A horse with no tail. She smiled faintly. He whittled it out of a broom handle. My mother was furious. Xander chuckled low in his throat. What happened to him? He joined the Navy. I haven't heard from him in years. They reached the edge of the field, where a fallen log offered a place to sit. Mabel climbed it and began arranging her pine cones in rows. Beatrice sat beside Xander, not quite touching, but close enough to feel the warmth of his arm. "The teacher says Mabel's quick with numbers," she said. "Better than most boys her age. She gets that from you?" "I suppose she does." They sat quiet for a while, watching the sun inch toward the western hills. A group of girls passed by in pairs, skipping rope and singing about a lady who lost her bonnet in the wind. Xander leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "There's a man in Salt Lake I used to ride with. Name's Ezra Lofton. He's got a store now, sells dry goods and keeps an ear to the ground. If word ever comes about that map, if someone's still chasing it, he'll hear." Beatrice turned slightly. "You trust him?" "With my life." She nodded. "Then write him." "I already did." She folded her hands in her lap. "I don't want to live in fear of something I destroyed." "You don't have to. But if a shadow's coming, I'd rather we see it before it sees us." Beatrice didn't reply, but her hand found his where it rested on the log. She didn't squeeze, didn't hold, but left her fingers there, steady. By the time they walked back to town, the sky had turned lavender and the lanterns along the church path were being lit. Mabel had fallen asleep draped across Xander's shoulders, her arms slack, her breath even. Beatrice opened the door to the boarding house, stepping aside to let him carry the child in. Upstairs, he laid her gently on the bed, then turned to find Beatrice standing in the doorway. Her eyes held no hesitation now. "You've given us more than I ever thought we'd find again." Xander shook his head. "It's not charity. It's choice." Beatrice stepped closer. "Then let me choose too." She reached up and touched his face, her hand light as breath. He leaned down, resting his forehead against hers, and for a long moment, they just stood like that, two people who had outrun fire and silence and come through it with their hands still open. Downstairs, Aldine's radio crackled with the soft hum of a hymn. A man on horseback passed outside, the hoofbeats fading into the dusk. And in the room above the street, the quiet finally felt like home. The morning of the fair broke clear and windless, with the sky a pale blue that stretched uninterrupted over the hills. The air smelled of baked earth and dry hay. Church bells rang faintly in the distance, calling no one in particular but reminding everyone the day had begun. Xander waited beside the church fence with two horses saddled and brushed, the finer one borrowed from the livery with Aldine's blessing. He wore a clean shirt, collar stiff from drying in the sun, and his boots had been re-oiled the night before. When Beatrice stepped out of the boarding house, carrying Mabel in one arm and a cloth-wrapped bundle in the other, he straightened. "You look ready," she said, her hair pinned back with a carved comb. "I figured if you were willing to share a fare with me, I ought to look like a man worth walking beside." She smiled, small and sure. "You do." Mabel stirred, lifting her head from her mother's shoulder. "You promised I could ride." "You can," Xander said. "With me, if that's all right." Beatrice gave a small nod and handed the girl over. Xander lifted Mabel into the saddle, then swung up behind her, his arm keeping her steady. Beatrice mounted her horse with practiced ease. The fairgrounds were laid out in the pasture west of town, where the grass grew tall and golden. Booths had been built from wagon beds and canvas, and a ring of wagons formed an outer boundary where families had staked their claim with quilts and barrels of cider. Livestock pens lined one edge, and the smell of roasting pork drifted on the breeze. Children darted between stalls. A fiddler played near the edge of the crowd, his bow dancing. Xander and Beatrice tied the horses at the rail and made their way in, Mabel between them now, her hand in Xander's. Near the quilting tent, a woman with a flour-dusted apron called out, "Beatrice Lorne, thought that was you." Beatrice turned. "Mrs. Tilly, you've been missed at the church socials. Are you staying on now?" "I am," Beatrice said. "I've taken work at the school." Mrs. Tilly's eyes flicked to Xander, then back to Beatrice. Her smile didn't falter. "Well, then this town's a bit better off than it was yesterday." Beatrice's cheeks colored faintly, but she nodded. "Thank you." Xander steered them toward the pie tent where Mabel picked a slice of apple from the row. He handed over a coin without comment, and they sat on a low bench beneath a shade tree. Mabel ate in silence, focused on her plate. Beatrice leaned in. "You've done more for her than I ever expected from anyone. I didn't do it for thanks." "I know." They watched a group of boys chase a greased pig across the clearing. Laughter rose, sharp and sudden, and Beatrice's hand settled lightly on Xander's knee. Later, they walked the length of the grounds, watching a man balance on a barrel while juggling 3 flat stones. Mabel clapped, her face bright. At the edge of the field, a preacher gave a quiet blessing over a table of preserves, and a pair of girls sang a tune about a boat on the Ohio. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows toward the cottonwoods, Xander took Beatrice's hand. "There's something I want to ask." She stopped walking and turned to face him. "I've spent most of my life looking for places I didn't have to stay in. But I've been thinking, maybe I've finally found one I don't want to leave." Her eyes softened. "You mean this town?" "I mean you." Beatrice blinked once. "You're sure?" "I've never been more." She looked down at Mabel, who had fallen asleep again, her head against Beatrice's hip, then back up at him. "Then I'll say yes before you've even asked the rest." Xander let out a slow breath. "I'd like to marry you, if you'll have me." Beatrice's voice was quiet, but steady. "I will." They walked back through the fair with Mabel cradled in Xander's arms. The lanterns were being lit, one by one, flickering against the darkening sky. Music drifted through the air, slow and bowed from a lone fiddle. That night, once Mabel was tucked into bed and the house had gone still, Beatrice stepped onto the porch where Xander waited. She slid her arms around him without a word. He pulled her close, resting his chin atop her head. The stars above were sharp and still. "I want to build something with you," she said. "We will," he answered. "Brick by brick, day by day." They stood there until the night cooled and the sounds of the fair faded into memory. Years passed, each marked by small, steady things. A home built on the hill above town with a porch that faced east toward the canyon. A garden that yielded beans and squash and late summer tomatoes. Mabel grew tall and sure-footed, her numbers outpacing her teacher by 12. Xander took work helping the railroad survey along the river, but he always came back by sundown, boots dusty, hands calloused. Beatrice taught letters and penmanship to the younger children and baked bread that was sold at the general store each week. She never looked over her shoulder again. She didn't need to. They married in the church with the cracked steeple under a sky as blue as the first morning she'd stepped into Dry Creek. Mabel stood beside them, clutching a small bouquet of wild clover. When the preacher asked if she took him, Beatrice said, "I already have." And Xander, eyes steady, said, "She's my piece." They lived quiet and they lived together. And that was enough.